Oh, good morning, everyone. Welcome to day 2 of this session on effective questioning in secondary science, day 2 with kind of a middle school focus. Today, I want to welcome everyone back. Hopefully you're able to get into yesterday's recording on day 1, and we are going to continue on today. A couple reminders from yesterday that in the chat box here, I again have posted the link to the tiny URL for the Google Slide program that has been guiding our discussion on effective questioning in the secondary science classroom. And you're free to click on that. And as I mentioned yesterday, you have access to that slideshow 24/7, 365 for as long as I have it filed away in my Google slide deck. So, and I don't plan on getting rid of that anytime soon. So you'll always have access to it. So let's go ahead and share my screen as we did yesterday. And here we go. Now, just for your information, I have continued on from yesterday. I am on slide 15 is where I'm beginning today in this Google Slide program. And again, effective questioning in secondary science, part 2. My name again is Craig Edmondson, Heartland AEA science consultant. And just as a reminder from yesterday also, should you need any assistance, contact information from our Heartland Science homepage, which is found under Instructional Services, Curriculum Instruction and Assessment. Scroll down on the left-hand side to Science and click on Science, brings you to this homepage. And again, the science consultants at Heartland who currently serve you, Ashley Delaney, school districts she serves, myself in northern half of Region 1, Region 6, 7, and 8, and regions I serve, or the school districts that I serve, and Adam Puterbaugh, who again serves the Des Moines School District. Once again, it would be nice if you have a question or a concern or comment or needed some sort of instructional support, that you contact the science consultant assigned to your school district. Okay. But if that's not feasible, if you can't get a hold of someone, you're free and welcome to contact any of the 3 of us. We'll put you in touch with who you need to be working with. But if you have a question, the important thing is to get that question answered. So feel free to contact any of the 3 of us at any time over the summer, and we'll get back to you just as quickly as we possibly can. Okay. Once again, the tiny URL, which you should be logged into today and following along with this Google Slide program. So I want to go back and review some of our discussion from yesterday and thinking about effective questioning in secondary science and in the classroom. You know, really the purpose of effective questioning, from my viewpoint, really makes the learning visible to the students. The question you're asking in the classroom and the questions that the students are asking in the classroom really helps to make that learning visible and helps to guide students on where you want them to go. The questions that you develop to facilitate the learning for the students helps to identify prior knowledge for students and determine what they already know and what you need to provide experiences with for them. And it increases the questions you ask and the questions you pull out from your students helps to increase reasoning ability and student understanding. If you think about that, the reasoning ability and increasing student understanding in science, as I highlighted yesterday, that goes right along with the claims, evidence, and reasoning that we apply in the science classroom. That we have students make a claim based on some phenomenon that we presented as part of the lesson, and then they start to collect evidence wrapped around that claim to support their thinking, to prove whether their thinking is right or wrong or needs to be adjusted. And then ultimately they have to justify and reason out their thinking based on the evidence. Well, the questions you ask and the questions you develop help guide them through that process. and the questions that they come up with helps them dig deeper into that learning objective and increase their understanding of the overall objective of the lesson. The questions that you ask and this philosophy of effective questioning really help to guide the formative process and really helps to solidify things for students. It opens conversations between students, and this goes back to what we talked about toward the end of the program yesterday, in avoiding the ping pong ball effect of teacher asks a question, student replies, teacher asks a question, student replies, and that goes back and forth. We want more of a format of a teacher asks a guiding question, a facilitating question, and then you get 2 or 3 or 4 student responses engaging in conversation around that question. And then later on, the teacher might ask another facilitating question just to get them back on track, keep them on task, and keep them focused on the learning objective at hand. It helps to deepen the intellectual thought for the students and encourages them to dig deeper depending on the questions that you are asking or the guiding questions you are providing for the students. And it does promote that student-to-student interaction in a respectful manner. So those are some of the things that we highlighted yesterday and we discussed yesterday. We want to ask questions. We want to get all the students involved in the classroom. So some of the things we talked about yesterday, use a no hands rule, no hands up. Avoid the raising a hand and answering a question. That has its advantages and disadvantages. One thing it can do as a disadvantage is it can limit conversation in the classroom. You only get the students answering questions that really want to answer the questions. And you, as we talked yesterday, you know that you tend to get the same students answering the questions all the time. And we want total participation in the classroom. Ask questions that encourage a range of responses that will encourage the students to, again, dig deeper and come up with different answers. Already addressed the ping pong effect of student, teacher, student, teacher, student, teacher, and more student participation, more student-centered over teacher-centered. And I really touched on arranging the room to encourage participation, avoiding rows, maybe setting up the room in stations or a U-shaped pattern, maybe even a box pattern where you're free to roam throughout the room, listening to questions that are going on without interrupting the students' conversations unless it's necessary. So it's very important that everyone is included in the conversation and that we are engaging them in that process. So in regards to principles for effective questioning, we want to give students time to think. We talked about wait time yesterday and making it a better practice to provide for wait time for the students. Don't look for an immediate answer. If you're asking the question and you're not getting an answer within 2 or 3 seconds, pause longer. Take about 10, 15 seconds to give people and students a chance to incorporate their thinking, process the information you've just provided, process their own thinking skills to come up with an answer. It's not that they're avoiding your question. It's in many cases, it's the case that they want to use the time to process their answers. One good strategy is to use mini whiteboards. Each student could have a mini whiteboard, propose answers on the whiteboard, clarify their thinking on the whiteboard, and then share that with one another, a way of taking notes, and then it's quickly erased. I've seen a few teachers use those in the classroom, and I think they've been very productive. A middle school teacher in Carroll has used whiteboards in his classroom, and sometimes students might have a thought and then conversation gets going and it escapes them, so it gives them a chance to write those out. I've even seen, which is really interesting, the use of desktops as a method for students to jot notes down right on top of the desk with a waterproof marker as they're thinking, and then quickly erase those. And I thought that was a really cool idea. Well, the time interval between a teacher asking a question and supplying the answer him or herself, or follow up with an additional question or comment is comic. That is the wait time that we're talking about. We talked yesterday that typically in a classroom over the course of the day, you might be asking 300 to 400 questions. You need to incorporate that wait time. For many teachers, the mean wait time is less than 1 second. Can you imagine that? By the time you get the question out, you're already providing an answer or you're already growing impatient. Increase the wait time to between 3 to 5 seconds, and you'll find that students will begin to respond at greater length with greater confidence. You've given them time to think, process the information, offer more unsolicited but appropriate responses, make sure that the responses are on task, they're focused on the learning objective, offer more diverse and alternative explanations, and relate responses to those from other students. I would say 3 to 5 seconds. You know, let's try that, okay? I ask a question. How was your day today? That was 5 seconds, okay? I would encourage maybe 5 to 10 seconds. So you'll have to feel that out for yourselves and what works for you in your classroom. But I myself have to work on wait time, and it's something that I continue to work on because I too want that immediate answer. So it's something you need to work on. So I want to go back to yesterday too. I had mentioned that I had heard a news report yesterday morning that there was this distant galaxy that was emitting radio waves that was so many light years away, and that these were pulsating signals that were radiating out from this distant galaxy, and that astronomers and people that research those incoming radio waves found it very interesting in that where that signal was coming from and what it might mean, especially since it was on a regular cycle. So I want to think about that. A little bit of background that I picked up on that from yesterday. Astronomers have detected a pattern in a mysterious fast radio burst coming from space. That fast radio burst, also referred to as an FRB, are millisecond-long bursts of radio waves in space, and astronomers have been, excuse me, been able to trace some radio bursts back to their home galaxies. Okay, so that's the background information I want to provide for you this morning. Okay. What I would like to ask you to do is, again, pause the tape for a few seconds, or the video, and develop a mix of questions, open-ended and closed-ended questions based on this phenomenon of a distant radio signal coming from space. What kind of questions does that bring up? What kind of questions might you ask students based on this radio signal coming from space? Provided a little bit of background information here for you. And under the picture of the galaxy here is a link to a CNN article where I've taken my information. This dates back to Monday, June 8th. This is Friday, so it was earlier this week, but I just heard it on the news report yesterday. Okay, so there's some background information here. So once again, pause the tape, come back when you're ready, develop a list of a mix of questions, open-ended and closed-ended questions related to this phenomenon. And we'll be back together soon. Okay, well, welcome back. Again, I'm not sure if you're watching this video individually on your own sometime, or maybe you're working in a small group, but either way, hopefully you were able to come up with some questions related to this phenomenon of the radio waves coming to Earth. And I don't believe that article mentioned how far away these radio waves were coming from. I was not able to clarify that yesterday it was either 3 billion light years or 300 billion light years away. It was a long ways. It was a long time, okay? And what that means. So I want to share with you just some of the questions I was able to come up with, and then take a look and determine if these were open-ended or closed-ended questions. So one question I came up with is, what is the source of the radio signal? I don't think we need to underline that, but we will keep it in bold. Where's the underline there? Okay. What is the source of the radio signal? How is the radio signal produced? Third question, how could we determine if the signal is coming from an alien society? Number 4, how often is the radio signal repeated? And finally, why is this signal worth investigating? So here you can see we've incorporated some open-ended and closed-ended questions. This first question, what is the source of the radio signal? Hopefully you would identify that as a closed question. It's right there. Okay, what is the source? Well, the signal's coming from blah, blah, this galaxy or whatever it might be. How is the radio signal produced? I would label that as an open question. It's going to involve more explanation, more in-depth knowledge on what is creating that. It's not just a right there answer, it's a more lengthy answer. How could we determine if the radio signal is coming from an alien society? Again, I would label that as open. It calls for speculation. It calls for processing information. It involves a more lengthy answer. So what would you think for number 4? How often is the radio signal completed? Is that right there knowledge, or does that involve a more lengthy answer? If you go back to the article, those fast radio bursts, the FRBs, are coming on a regular cycle. So that would be a right there answer, so I would label that as closed. And why is this signal worth investigating? Definitely open, because again, it's calling for you to process information, apply what you already know, apply the facts that were given, and come up with a logical conclusion that's debatable and open to a discussion. Okay. So as you put your questions together, should be a mixture of closed and open-ended questions related to the topic at hand. I just wanted to provide an example of that this morning. And then, again, I get this feeling of deja vu that on the news this morning, as I was preparing to get together with you folks today, news coming from Saturn that Saturn's largest moon, Titan, is escaping from the clutches of Saturn. It's starting to move away. And so this is Saturn here on the left, and this is Saturn's moon, Titan. And again, I haven't had time to really investigate that further, other than that is occurring. A short news brief on that was that Saturn's largest moon, Titan, is escaping from the clutches of the gaseous giant at a rate that's 100 times faster than scientists previously estimated. Saturn's gravity might not be strong enough to hold onto Titan, but it's still strong enough to wipe its iconic rings out of existence in another 100 million years. So some really interesting information in just those couple of sentences. Titan's leaving for some reason, gravitational pull of Saturn. Eventually the rings of Saturn are going to disappear and can bring up a lot of questions. So just for your own consideration, again, you can pause the tape, you can come back to this later. What type of questions could you develop around today's news from Saturn? I'd like to incorporate real life situations, current events, current things that are in the news into my science instruction to make it relevant for students. And these are just a couple of things that have popped up just real briefly in just listening to WHO radio in the morning as I get ready for my day, that you could use as bell ringers in the classroom and develop your questions around and relate to your understanding of what's going on also. So again, principles for effective questioning. When students provide a response, we do not want to judge those responses. We want open conversation that's on task, that involves constructive feedback, constructive conversations, and active listening in a respectful manner. When a teacher judges responses with a yes, good, nearly, and etc., students can reason to themselves, the teacher said that was good. That is not what I was going to say. So what I was going to say cannot be good. So I won't say anything. It stifles the conversation. You know, maybe a reply similar to this, thank you for that. That is really interesting. What other ideas do people have? Again, going back to that open-ended guiding question that keeps them on task and digging further. Ask open questions that permit a greater variety of responses and reply to students with comments that do not close off alternative ideas. Don't shut down the conversation. Get in the practice of asking effective questions that will take them deeper into content. So, what are some examples of that and how might that be done? So here, from Formative Assessment in Science and Mathematics Education, that's provided down here in the notes with a link there. And also underneath the principles for effective questioning. If you would like to see the research article itself, the link is right there for you. The research article brought up several ideas for providing approaches to encourage thinking and dialogue. So I just want to run through these and ask you to consider these in your classroom. Ask students to repeat their explanation. Ask for clarification. Now, if they come across with a thought to show that they truly understand the concept, ask them to clarify it and ask it in another way. Can you just say that again? Can you repeat that? Can you explain that further? Provides for that deeper thought. Invite students to elaborate. What do you mean by that? Can you say a little more about that? What brings you to that conclusion? Again, guiding questions that are going to ask students to go into deeper thought with those. Challenge students to offer a reason. What does that remind you of? Yes, claims, evidence, and reasoning. What's the reason for that? What's your evidence for that? Can you explain why that works? Okay. Would be a good way to stress that question. So they are explaining in detail. Remember, the purpose of effective questioning is to identify prior knowledge and increase the reasoning ability and student understanding through your questioning. So ask for more details in their answers. Cue alternative responses. Can you suggest another way of doing this? Is there only one way? Is there only one approach? Ask them to come up with other ideas, or ask a small group. What's another way that Susan just suggested approaching it in this manner? Does anybody have any other ideas on another way that this could be done? Support with nonverbal interest. Yeah, those nonverbal clues, that active listening, that listening for what's not said, trying to observe what's not said, a nod of the head, rotate hand to indicate that you want more. Encourage students. You can't say so much with this video, but I tend to talk with my hands, to bring out more, to bring out additional information. Encourage students to speculate. You've got this situation. What would happen if, let's speculate about Saturn's moon. Let's speculate about Titan. What's going to happen when Titan leaves the orbit of Saturn? Where's Titan going to go? What's that going to do to Saturn itself? Okay. Which direction is Titan going to go? Does it put the Earth at risk? Okay. Ask students to speculate, to think beyond and outside the box for additional understanding. Make challenging statements. So focus in on what somebody in the group would say. Say, someone in this group said, were they right? Were they wrong? Why? And that right there is a closed-ended question. Were they right? Yes. Okay, well, you need to dig in further to that. Why were they right? Why do you feel they were right? Or you disagree with their decision. Why do you disagree? Give me some details. Can you clarify your thinking on why you don't think Dan was right in his answer? Allow rehearsal of responses. If you have students working in a small group or they're working in a think, pair, share with one another and they're pairing up, ask them that before they reply to the whole group, ask them to try back and forth with their partner and question back and forth with their partner with possible responses so that they can determine what factual evidence they need in order to provide a quality answer. We touched on this before. Encourage students to ask questions. So students providing an answer, again, this avoids the ping pong effect, a student-to-student response. Would anyone like to ask Pat a question about that? And then Pat can provide clarifying details. Or maybe Pat is not totally sure on where his or her answer was going, so somebody else can blend into the conversation and it drives the conversation further in the classroom. Ask students to think aloud. Can you go through that step by step? You just told me such and such. Can you explain that by step process? How would that work? Okay. Again, open-ended questioning. Encourage students to make connections. Can you remember something else we did like this? That's a sense of elaboration. Okay? That they're going to take this situation and relate it to a situation that's similar but different, but kind of brings out the point. So they're going to make connections with their answer to other situations. You as a teacher, you as an instructor, the facilitator of learning, think aloud with your students. Example of that, let's think this through together. Don't be afraid to question your students and admit to your students, I don't totally know the answer to this situation. Let's work it out together. That's totally fine. We're not all experts in anything. And many times in your classroom, you'll come across middle school students that maybe have a vast background in some piece of scientific knowledge. Maybe they were a Girl Scout or a Boy Scout or engaged in something from a farm or took a family trip somewhere and have an experience with visiting the Grand Canyon that they can elaborate on. Maybe they can provide evidence from their background for the entire class to bring out that thought completely. Okay. Plan how you will arrange the room and the resources needed. Okay. I mentioned this before, a U-shaped pattern or some sort of conference style, a box, something that opens up the classroom. Arrange students so they can see and hear one another as well as the teacher. You may need to rearrange chairs in a U shape, or the students could move and perch closer together, or maybe you will move to the back of the room so this question is the focus of attention and not the teacher. Yeah, I very seldom stay at the front of the room in presenting PD, or even in the classroom. I would roam from spot to spot, and I very seldom had my desks in rows. They were usually grouped in, tables were grouped in squares, or maybe small U-shaped patterns, whatever I could accommodate so that I could get around and so that the students were facing one another. So experiment with arranging your room that drives conversation. Plan on how you will introduce the questioning session. Silence will be hard for you to bear in the classroom, but the students may find it confusing and even threatening. Explain why there will be times of quiet. Explain wait time to students. Explain to them that, if things aren't getting an immediate answer, we're going to wait and let you process that information. Define for them, explain to them what wait time is all about. Plan on how you will establish the ground rules. No hands up rule. Some teachers have had to ask their students to sit on their hands so that they remember not to put their hands up. The students will be allowed to put their hands up to a question. So if a hand shoots up, remember to ask them what question they would like to ask. The students may also be used to giving short answers, so you could introduce a minimum length through, etc. Your answer must be 5 words length as a minimum. Okay. I would try to steer away from no hands, okay? Or actually apply no hands and steer away from hands going up, and encourage ongoing conversation in a respectful manner. Word persons like that. I believe I talked yesterday about how you could use some sort of hands-on item, a tennis ball, a football, maybe just a stick, a rock or something, and whoever has that in their possession has the freedom to talk that time. No one interrupts while that person is explaining their answer, and then they pass it on to another person who wants to make a comment, and that will help guide the conversation. A couple more of these. Plan the first question that you will use. Definitely plan out your questions, come up with your strategy before the lesson, and develop questions that are a mix, that vary in depth of answer. That some might be right there, some might involve a little bit of detail, some might be more extensive. So plan your questions ahead, have those written out and accessible to you. Plan on how you will give thinking time. Will you allow 3 to 5 seconds between asking a question and expecting an answer? Will you ask the students to think, pair, share, giving 30 seconds for talking to a partner before offering an idea in whole class discussion? Will you use another strategy that allows students time to think? No. Experiment with that. Give them, and let the students know, hey, we're gonna address this question. You have 45 seconds to come up with an answer. Keep them on task, will keep them focused and ready to provide an answer, and not knowing which students will be called upon. Okay. And plan how and when you will intervene. That's very important. Will you need to intervene at some point to refocus students? Probably. Will students lose attention and begin to talk about something else? Probably. Have 1 or 2 questions ready to ask partway through this lesson to check on their progress and their learning in a formative manner. Okay. So this idea about questioning, again, I'm going to ask you to, on a sheet of paper, on someplace where you can jot down some ideas, I want to show you this video underneath the questioning icon here, addressing the question, how do you ask good scientific questions? So jot down some thoughts as we go through the video here.
Asking questions is a vital part of the scientific process. But it's not enough to simply ask any question. Science is about asking good questions, questions that can be answered through direct observation or with scientific tools, questions that examine the relationships between phenomena. For instance, let's examine the question, what's the meaning of life? Well, this is certainly a thought-provoking question. It's not one that's easily answered. Its answer would likely be based on your individual values or beliefs, so the answer would vary greatly depending on the person doing the answering. So while this might be a good question for a philosophy or religion class, it's not the best question to be answered through science. What about the question, what's the best brand of sunscreen? This is a better scientific question. However, it's still a bit vague and leaves room for personal interpretation. Best could mean cheapest, highest SPF value, best smelling, or most likely to stay on while swimming. Consider the question, which sunscreens have the highest SPF? This question is better, as it can easily be answered through direct observation. You just look at the available sunscreens in the store and compare their SPF values. But this question is a basic data collecting question. While it's useful in building knowledge, it doesn't require any explanation or experimentation, so the question can still be improved upon. How about this? Do sunscreens with higher SPFs block more UV light than sunscreens with lower SPFs? This is an example of a good scientific question. It isn't based on values or opinions. It examines the relationship between SPF and the amount of blocked UV light. It can be investigated through a controlled experiment, and the results can be quantifiably measured and interpreted.
So hopefully you can see within that video the idea of asking good scientific questions, questions that are observable, questions that are testable. Okay? And for the sake of time, I'm just going to ask you to consider that and what good scientific questions are. Feel free to go back and watch that video again as you reflect and consider those. And again, I'm going to ask you to pause and reflect here. Pause the video and come back whenever you are ready. But I have a second video I want to take us through. What does good questioning look like in the science classroom? Okay, so we've been talking about effective questioning in the classroom in general and what good questioning looks like in a science classroom. So I want to play this video for you and just ask you to take out a piece of paper and feel free to, after the video, pause the tape, have a discussion if there's somebody else in the room, but address this question: how is questioning being applied in this science classroom? So let's get right to it. The link is down here. It's also underneath the two brains here. So how is questioning being applied in this middle school classroom?
If it's safe to tube in the water, because
I'll start that again since the volume was down. There we go.
This is still settling, but we found a lot of little organisms.
So cool. The real question we're trying to answer here is if it's safe to tube in the water, because I swim here every summer, and I just realized how dirty it was.
When we design a science lesson to be an inquiry-based lesson, we start everything around a central question that may last for one class period or a series of class periods. And then they work through some experiment and conversation, perhaps some reading, and they work together. And the answers are always just a little bit out of reach for the kids until they really reach a point where they have this sense of discovery. Each of you are going to be in a group where you're going to sample one parameter down at the creek. And then you're going to make an infographic about your parameters. So for example, maybe it will be temperature and turbidity. And then ultimately, what you're going to have to decide in your final prompt is going to be answering this question. Would you recommend to your friends coming from out of town that they go tubing in Boulder Creek?
If you just ask a question and then gave the answer, it would be the same as if you just read the textbook. So we don't like to do that. We like to ask the question and then give a lot of different experiences, both through media, through discussion, through research, so kids can start to answer that question themselves.
When we actually go down to the creek, it's an exciting day for the kids. We've talked up the idea that we're really in an outdoor classroom. Let's find a spot and let's sit down and start working on our physical survey of the area, everybody. So you'll work on your map first. Suddenly they're looking at it through a different lens. They're looking at it through a lens as a place where we're now going to be doing some sampling and some scientific thinking. If the water appears clear, is it clean? And then if it's not clean, what does that mean?
Mr. Schwartz gave us bugs that can live in healthy water and bugs that can live in unhealthy water. Yeah. We're gonna find which bugs are we finding here, and if they're all in like unhealthy water bugs, then we're gonna like, no, this is unhealthy water.
think it's 5 ppm. From what we found, there wasn't as much nitrate as we thought there would be.
We would still go swimming even though it seems pretty dirty, but we know that it's just there's a lot of organisms in here, and that leads us to believe that it's actually pretty healthy.
And we spend the next class period sort of going through that data, and they put that into a poster, an infographic, where they can actually share with the class in a way that's relevant to the kids, something that's kind of flashy and interesting. What is the data that our group got? And then what do we do with that data if we look at everyone's data together? So kids reach their conclusions a couple days after we do our sampling.
Because sometimes, like when you're just reading from a book, you don't really think about how this is actually real life and this how it actually works.
We're working through some question together, and we're discovering things as we go. And kids always bring with them knowledge. And very often it turns out that the kids teach me a lot, and we're all sort of learning together.
Okay, so hopefully you were able to come up with some thoughts there related to what does good questioning look like in that science classroom, which was more of an environmental science outdoor middle school classroom. What I'd also like to ask you to consider here is what type of questions were being asked. Were there a mixture of questions that this instructor was getting at? What type of questions were the students asking of one another as they were looking to collect data and investigate their learning objective further? If the questions were scientific, how do you know? What classifies a scientific question? And how does that all work? And do you feel overall, were the questions effective? And if you want to take the time, what type of questions would you develop in a similar classroom setting like that to make them effective and to guide the students? So again, I'd like you to pause and reflect here. This will be our concluding, more or less, ticket out the door question as we begin to conclude our session today. But just for yourself, record one example of how you would use effective questioning as part of your science instruction. Okay. How would that all take place? Go ahead, pause the tape, jot down a few ideas, come back here as soon as you're ready. Okay, well, notice my wait time there. And welcome back as we begin to conclude. One thing I would like you to consider too also is how does this all relate to our science standards? Okay. How does this relate to the 3 dimensions of learning in dealing with the science and engineering practices, the cross-cutting concepts, and the disciplinary core ideas? How does effective questioning tie to the use of storylines and phenomenon within a lesson? And how do you structure your questioning around a bundle of science standards to promote 3-dimensional learning? If you need any assistance with any of that, I would be happy to help you. I'd be happy to brainstorm with you. Feel free to contact me if you have any questions, or the other 2 science consultants. A couple of links here for you. The 3 dimensions circle here takes you to the NGSS website, and the Iowa Core symbol down here takes you to the Iowa Department of Education and their website. And finally, effective questioning in science. A point to leave you with: why would a secondary science instructor incorporate effective questioning into science instruction? As we leave this concept for today, I would like you to consider that as you begin to plan for whatever education looks like in the fall for your school district. And again, if I or any of the science consultants can be of support to you in that manner as you plan for next year, never hesitate to get in touch with us. We will all be going off contract here in the next few days, but we all will be checking email throughout the summer And don't hesitate if you're working on some things, either on contract or off contract over the course of the summer, feel free to reach out. I myself will try to get back to you within 24 hours. And I'm sure the other science consultants are the same. So with that, we've run out of time for today. I want to thank you for viewing and selecting this tape to view and learn more about effective questioning in the classroom. I again am Craig Edmondson, science consultant for Heartland AEA. Enjoyed being with you today. Have a great day. Have a great summer. I hope I can be working with you in the fall. Take care, everyone.